It's a great pleasure to present my second school improvement report, Better Schools, the Future of the Country, published by Finito, the employability experts. This year, 2024, marks the 80th anniversary of the seminal 1944 Education Act, the act that introduced free secondary education. The act was largely the work of the eponymous Butler, one of a line of radical reforming Conservative education ministers, paving the way for Kenneth Baker and more recently for Michael Gove. But let me state at the outset that the report I present is purely and simply a school improvement report. There is absolutely nothing political about this report. There is, however, a recognition and understanding that if education policy is right, there could be rich pickings at the ballot box. There are 1 million votes in England schools alone. But I repeat that the report itself is purely educational. Let me also state by way of introduction that this report is not intended in any shape or form to criticise either current or previous policy. The report is nothing more, nothing less than a list of recommendations, hopefully practicable, hopefully cost effective, but perhaps most importantly, a list of recommendations made by someone who has spent his career working in the state school system. Let me briefly then look at 4 aspects of the report. Firstly, I have no doubt that we can improve our schools simply by improving the dialogue and the communication between all involved. In the original report published by the College Green Group, I made the recommendation that we set up a National Schools Council, the title is neither here nor there, but a formal body that regularly brings together ministers, civil servants and practitioners. And the reason for this was really several-fold. One was, yes, to break down barriers, to create a new conduit between the profession and Westminster. But it was also because of the recognition that there are very, very few educational policymakers who have any experience of working at the chalk face or the interactive smartboard face as it is now. Surely we should try and harness that knowledge, that experience, that commitment that is out there in our schools and all work together to ensure that future policy is practicable and that it does actually lead to a genuine raising of standards. Secondly, let me say something about curriculum. Now, since 2019, curriculum has been, in the words of Amanda Spielman, the former Chief Inspector, curriculum has been the hot topic. Now, personally, I argue, and I accept that there will be many out there who disagree with me, but I personally argue that the Key Stage 4 curriculum remains too narrow. I can see that it is of absolutely no benefit to the country. I think it's also a questionable use of taxpayers' money, that after 11 years of compulsory schooling, after all the millions we spend on schools, after all the reforms, that still 1/3, 1 in 3 GCSE grades is a failure. Now let me leap in straight away and say this is not an argument to say that we should shift that bell curve of grade distribution to give prizes for all. This is not about dumbing down. This report is about raising standards. But we can raise standards by broadening the curriculum and broadening the opportunities available to young people, especially to those in that very difficult but crucially important 13, 14 to 16 age bracket. I'm often reminded of that wonderful comment by Sir Anthony Seldon that we shouldn't just ask, how intelligent are you? We should also ask, how are you intelligent? They are 2 very, very different questions and they elicit very different answers. Let's also not forget that at the moment we are facing the worst non-attendance rates, let's be blunt, truancy rates, since records began. Surely by making school more meaningful, more successful, dare I say it, more enjoyable for more young people, we will help attendance and behaviour, but also in the long run, we shall empower more young people with the skills and knowledge necessary for them to make a positive contribution to the economy and indeed to society as a whole. But, and there is a very big but, we can discuss curriculum, vocational courses, academic courses until the cows come home. But at the end of the day, if we do not have enough well-qualified, experienced, inspirational classroom teachers to actually deliver in the classroom, we shall achieve very little. And so I make absolutely no apology for the fact that the main thrust of this report is to try and reverse the current recruitment and retention crisis. And let's be clear, crisis it is. The evidence, the statistics speak for themselves. This year, only 50% of secondary teacher training places have been filled. And that follows a very poor 57% last year. A survey of heads found that last year 1/2 of heads had at least one vacancy that they couldn't fill. And in some ways more worrying than that, 40% of heads openly admitted to appointing someone that they didn't think was very good because there was no alternative. But of course, what makes this the perfect storm is that we are not just talking about the recruitment of teachers. We are also talking about the retention of our most experienced and our most able teachers. And yet, the DfE's own figures show that 1/3 of all new teachers quit the profession within 5 years. And personally, as a head, I should have argued it takes 5 years to make an accomplished teacher. NFER reported last year that job adverts and vacancies were up 93% on the year before. The list goes on. And of course, the evidence also proves that this is not primarily about teachers' pay packets, though of course that is an issue. As a matter of urgency, we must raise the profile, the status of the teaching profession, and we must also raise the morale within the profession. Because let's not forget, to be simple, to be blunt, no school can be better than the quality of its teachers. Let me try and finish on a positive note. The report now contains some 60 recommendations, all of which could be introduced before the next general election on the condition the election is at the end of the calendar year. And that includes the introduction of the most powerful recommendation, the introduction of a national non-academic leaving certificate, a formal national certificate that records and assesses a pupil's attendance, behaviour, attitude, punctuality, the very things that employers and interviewers need to know. And of course, by making this a national formal certificate, we are putting the onus for behaviour and attendance fairly and squarely on the shoulders of each and every teenager. What possibly could be better preparation for the world of work, for adulthood, than the teaching of personal responsibility and personal accountability? Oh, and I almost forgot that of those 60 recommendations, all bar a handful would cost the Treasury and the taxpayer either very little or absolutely nothing at all.